Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Brigida, thank you so much for being here with the NCIHC Languages of Limited Diffusion conversations today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. My first question for you is, can you share a little bit about how you got started as a interpreter and what languages do you interpret for?
Well, thank you so much, David, for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Um, I speak Spanish, English, Mixteco. I grew up speaking Mixteco. I'm a trilingual interpreter. I'm learning my fourth language, which is Atriki. Um, Halfway there, but not really an interpreter for that language, but I'm learning it. Um, growing up, I was interpreting for my parents. I didn't know it was a profession until I grew up, and I just had this passion with learning cultural language, anything that would help anybody and help them feel like I was able to speak to the provider and express what I need. So, I that's how I started in the profession, interpreting for my parents, and then eventually and later on in life, I got into it as more of a professional interpreter. I took trainings, and developed skills to become an interpreter.
Wow, that's excellent. And what does the current pool of Indigenous interpreters look like today? And what are some of the challenges there that you see?
Well, working with many and trilingual interpreters, it's difficult because there's challenges that we face every day. For example, no equivalent in our language. It's like saying good morning. You can walk into the room and say good morning to a patient, but a mistake was like there is nothing. There's no way of saying buenos dias en Mixteco. The literal translation of buenos dias, um, EU is like, are you there? So that, but obviously to me and then in the community, we know in our language that's an
Hmm.
equivalent close to saying buenos dias, but it's are you there? But in our language, it's like good morning. We know what that means. So we face those challenges where we have to train our interpreters to be able to, um, you know, ask the proprietor for clarification. There's no equivalent in my language. If you can explain it, I'm happy to interpret. So we, work with our indigenous interpreters in that aspect. Also, there's I would say indigenous interpreters or trilingual interpreters are faced with, this kind of like will push to take an assignment even though they're not really qualified to do
Hmm.
because there's no other way. There's nobody else that
Right.
speaks the language. So we, teach our interpreters, okay, what's the skills that you need to be able to complete this assignment.
Hmm. That's so important. I'm really glad you touched on that because that is something that I hear as well, where it's like, oh, great, you speak Mixteco, or maybe it's Mien or Mam or one of the languages of limited diffusion, where there's not a lot of interpreters, and what's so important in our industry is that we still find the qualified and experienced and trained interpreter no matter what the language is. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you, as well as what are the training opportunities that are currently available for the indigenous language interpreters that you see. I know that Victor Sosa, who's also a big advocate for interpreting, and he wrote the book on indigenous interpreting.
Mhm.
And can you talk a little bit about the training opportunities that he's currently offering?
Yeah, so the Indigenous Interpreter Training, it's a 63-hour program. And to me, initially when I did that program, I was just so fascinated by the fact that it was so well done. And some of our Indigenous interpreters working at Natividad were able to participate in that, in the process of creating that training. And I was one of them where we would give our experience and help out and like, well, this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense. But I don't see too many trainings that are dedicated to indigenous or native speakers or
Mhm.
trilingual interpreters. And the fact that Victor has been able to do this is, so fascinating and so important for the community. Um, there's there are a lot of interpreters out there that want to become one, I shouldn't say interpreter. There are a lot of people out there that want to become interpreters, but they do say, well, I don't have my high school diploma, or I don't speak the third language. I only speak Mixteco and Spanish. And so in this training, we're able to, well, Victor is able to help the community develop them. Victor is the type of person where I want a pool of interpreters, but not just any pool. I want a pool of interpreters well seasoned and trained. How
Yes.
do I do this? Let's work on this and let's develop this. And so I have been able to participate in this training and work close with him. And so I think this training is really important because it all goes really deep into the culture, the belief, equivalency, also role plays, because that's very important, and relay interpreting, which is really important for the interpreters that only speak Spanish and Triqui or Mixteco to Spanish and can't go to English.
It's so important to have that kind of a training that really has that hands-on experience, and that's what I've heard from everyone that's taken Victor's training. You work with lots of patients directly there at the hospital, and my question for you, Brigida, is can you think of an example maybe where you really saw the impact firsthand of the importance of having interpretation provided for a patient or for a family?
Yeah, there's so many, but let me see. One, I remember a patient. This was when I was working in the ED. It was a trauma patient, a baby, and they called right away. They needed a Mixteco. Okay, which Mixteco is? We don't know. Let me go over there and find out. Happened to be for me. I speak Mixteco de San Martin Peras, and I went and introduced myself to the family and to the provider, because it's trauma. It was so fast, like boom, boom, boom. And so the fact that I was able to kind of say, look, hey, I need to introduce myself to this patient. I understand this trauma, but I need to tell the patient what I'm going to do. And so, but I did it quickly because it was needed to be done. And the fact that her baby didn't make it, and it was a very sad situation, but she did tell us, the provider, I'm very thankful. It was a very complicated situation, but I'm very thankful that I was able to express my needs. I was able to express what had happened. I was able to communicate with everybody, and I feel like my wishes were done. And I really appreciate that. And communication is a very important thing in our daily life, and so that fact that she was told me she was very thankful that she had someone that spoke her language was made me feel so happy that I was able to help her in this difficult situation. In their experience, they've been used to having an interpreter but doesn't speak their variant or isn't from their town, so they kind of give up, but she was very thankful that she was able to have someone that spoke her language.
Wow, that's so powerful. And like you said, the importance of having the interpreter that speaks the right variant there, and it really allows that individual the ability to participate in their healthcare, or their, in this case, child's healthcare is such a vital right that we all should have access to. And I just applaud you, Brigida, for taking such a high level of importance about our profession, and really helping spread those opportunities to other interpreters that are out there. And for those that are listening today, hopefully maybe one of the takeaways is to be able to think about the languages that you might speak, and is this something that you can get the right training for, so that you can also interpret in those languages, because the languages of limited diffusion have a smaller pool of interpreters, and getting the right trained interpreters are such a vital need to the community. Um, Brigida, if we want to, as we wrap it up here today, I just want to ask you one last question. Um, if you can think of, in your vast experience as an interpreter, you've encountered so many different scenarios. What are sort of if you had to say just three main things that every interpreter should know that will really help them in their interpreter career? I know there's probably a lot you could share, but if you just had to only share three.
Well, let's see. I think interpreting is as a profession, and to be able to give the best of you as an interpreter, you really have to be in the profession, like love what you're doing. And if you don't, then you just kind of maybe give half of versus giving everything and going. Sometimes as indigenous interpreters or trilingual interpreters, I find myself in the situation where sometimes I have to go beyond. Sometimes I have to advocate, but as my last resource. But
Hmm.
to be able to distinguish when to do that is a very important skill that you learn with time and training. And so I would also say be able to um, ask for clarification, to not be afraid. Sometimes because we come from a small town, we're not used to um, asking for clarification or maybe even speaking up, and it makes it challenging. So, and isn't that just with time you gain that experience and you feel more comfortable doing it? And also, as a medical interpreter, you're gonna come across so many different things, situations in the hospital or outside of the hospital. You're gonna be exposed to family meetings or palliative care, end of life, blood everywhere, trauma. And so just, be aware of what your limit is.
Mm, that's beautiful, Brigida, and you're definitely an interpreter, like you said at the beginning, that's all in, and we appreciate how passionate you are about interpretation, and it just really is obvious. And I know your colleagues feel it. I know that the patients and providers you work with on a day in and day out basis experience that, and it's so wonderful to have have this conversation with you today. And also, for those of you who don't know, Brigida is also a part of NCIHC, and she is a part of the Languages of Limited Diffusion work group with me and several other uh, colleagues as well. So it's great to have her on our team, and she's bringing a ton of value to the group. So we thank you for that. And we with that, just want to say again, thanks for your time today, Brigida, and
Yeah.
have a
Thank
wonderful
you
day.
very much. It was a pleasure. And I'm happy to, be able to help other interpreters. And, also just to add to this, get onto the website of the National Council. You'll find a lot of information, tips that would help you. For example, this, maybe this video or other resources, get on there. And, it's also be very important to be up to date with anything that has to do with interpreting, because the profession changes, things happen, for example COVID. So it's good to be up to date within anything that has to do with your profession.
Thank you, Brigida.
Thank you, David.